Harald Sigurdsson, better remembered to history as Harald Hardrada, was the last of the great Viking kings of the medieval era, and his military prowess, cunning and repute as a fearsome warrior have solidified his place as one of Norway's greatest monarchs. And anyone even remotely familiar with English history will know that Harald Hardrada was defeated by Harald Godwinson at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. And it is in the middle of the chaos of this battle that Harald Hardrada would meet his ultimate demise. Although all contemporary sources agree that Harald Sigurdsson definitely indeed did perish at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the actual injury or manner of his death is surrounded by ambiguity. And in this video we will be doing a deep dive into the final moments of Harald Hardrada and attempt to better understand what is the most plausible cause of death for this fearsome warrior king, whose death would mark the end of the Viking era and indirectly mark the beginning point of the Norman conquest of England and the ultimate rise of William the Conqueror. However, before we can delve deeper into the discourses available in regards to Harald's death, we must first have a basic understanding of who Harald Hardrada was as an individual and why his defeat at Stamford Bridge is one of the most critical and often overlooked events in medieval history. Born in the year 1015, Harald was the youngest son of Sigurd, a minor king in the district of Ringerike in Norway. And Harald displayed an indomitable and fierce spirit from a young age, and he quickly adapted to Viking life and was proficient with sword, horse riding and a bow before he was even a teenager. Growing up, Harald was rumoured to idolize his elder half-brother Olaf Haraldsson, and at the age of 15, he would join his brother's rebellion against King Canut's loyalists in Norway, and the Battle of Stigstad would take place in which Olaf would be killed. Although this is not ubiquitously agreed upon by contemporary sources, and we will definitely be delving into the death of Olaf Harald's son in a future video. Nevertheless, in this battle, Harald would also sustain a grievous injury and he would be forced into exile for 15 years after this defeat. First staying with the Kievan Rus and then eventually making his way to the Byzantine Empire. While in the Byzantine Empire, Harald would join the Varangian Guard and solidify his skills as a warrior, developing his acumen as a military commander and also accumulating significant wealth after partaking in numerous successful campaigns across the Mediterranean and Middle East. And with this newfound wealth and power, Harald would return to Norway and eventually become first co-king of Norway and then eventually the sole king of the nation. It would take years for Harald to consolidate his power, as he had to deal with numerous internal court politics as well as constant invasion forces from Denmark. However, by 1066, King Harald Sigurdsson would be secure in his power and would look to expand his influence across the sea to England, with the aim of establishing himself as the new monarch of Britain. As the nation was contending with a period of great turmoil and confusion due to the death of King Edward the Confessor, who had died without naming an heir to the English throne. Joining forces with Harald Godwinson's brother Tostig Godwinson, he would sail his Norwegian forces to England and defeat the Earls of Edwin and Morcar at the brutal Battle of Fulford. Emboldened by his victory, Harald would continue to pillage throughout England until he would eventually clash with Harald Godwinson at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. And amidst this battle, his forces would be defeated and Harald Hardrada himself would be killed and sent to Valhalla. But what actually occurred at Stamford Bridge? How was such a fierce and powerful Viking king defeated? And what was the exact method of his death? Through a critical analysis of contemporary and academic sources, an attempt to deduce the most probable culprit of Harald Hardrada's death will be undertaken in this video. There have been 4 medieval sources identified which make reference to the death of Harald Hardrada: the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, Carmen de Histinge Proelio, Gesta Normannorum Ducum, and the Heimskringla. Out of these 4 sources, it is solely the Heimskringla that gives a specific method of death for Harald, which we'll explore in the next part of this video. But the other 3 sources all agree that the Battle of Stamford Bridge is definitely where Harald was defeated and eventually killed, although no comment on any exact specifics of how his death may have occurred are ever given. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle simply states that there was a great slaughter on both sides, and there was slain Harald Hardrada and Earl Tostig, and the Northmen who survived were put to flight. And this viewpoint is further strengthened by the Carmen de Hastingi Proelio, a Norman historical text which was developed on the orders of William the Conqueror, most likely in the year 1067, so potentially just a few months after the events of the Battle of Stamford. This historical document simply just states that, and King Harald of Norway, struck down in the fierce battle, fell lifeless. So, based on the contemporary evidence we have available with 3 historical texts of varying origin and one source from a few centuries later, all agreeing unequivocally that Harald Sigurdsson definitely perished during the Battle of Stamford Bridge. However, as previously stated, there is still a fair degree of ambiguity around the exact cause of death for Harald Hardrada, and there are 2 theories that can be deciphered from medieval sources which may shed some light on what wound or injuries ended in the ultimate demise of one of history's greatest Viking kings. There are 2 propositions present in contemporary sources on how Harald Hardrada may have perished, and the discourse we will be discussing first is the most popular and common theory. This theory is first presented in the Heimskringla, in which the author, Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson, states that Harald Hardrada was killed early on during the Battle of Stamford Bridge after getting hit in the neck by an arrow, a grievous wound which would rapidly lead to his death. Snorri states the following in his 12th century historical text: King Harald Sigurdsson had advanced to the front of his banner and was fighting so bravely that all had to give way before him. So says Arnor, the Earl's Skald. Where battle storm was ringing, where arrow cloud was singing, Harald stood there of armor bare. Then there came an arrow and struck King Harald in the throat, and that was his death wound. It is important to emphasize the fact that the Heimskringla was written almost 2 centuries after the events of the Battle of Stamford Bridge, which brings into doubt the validity of the work. But this text seems to highlight the viewpoint that after Hardrada's death, his legend seems to have grown, as Sturluson states that Harald was fighting bare-chested without armor and was leading his army from the front, which are declarations not found in any other contemporary sources. There seems to also be an element of embellishment present within the text, which makes the probability of Harald Hardrada actually dying specifically from an arrow wound to the neck highly improbable, as none of the contemporary sources written only within 1 to 2 years of the event make no mention of an arrow wound being the cause of Harald Sigurdsson's death. In fact, if one considers the details written in the Gesta Nornarum Ducum, a historical text written in 1070, so only 4 years after the events of Stamford Bridge, the document states specifically in regards to the death of Harald Hardrada that he fell covered with deadly wounds. Again, there is no reference to an arrow causing Harald's death in this source either. Alternatively, this contemporary, perhaps even eyewitness testimony states that Harald fell in battle after receiving multiple wounds, and there is no reference of a singular deadly injury being responsible for his death. The consensus amongst most modern historians as well is that Harald Hardrada most certainly did perish at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, most probably during melee combat in which his off-guard forces would have been overrun and he would have died from multiple wounds, as the most nearest to the event sources seem to state. Therefore, to conclude, all contemporary and the majority of modern historians all agree that Harald Hardrada did most definitely die during the Battle of Stamford Bridge, and that it is highly probable that he died from hand-to-hand combat and perhaps a series of wounds, but it will be impossible to ever determine with 100% certainty where and what this fatal wound may have been, as no eyewitness testimony exists which goes into the specifics of this Viking king's death. I also agree with this discourse, as I believe a fierce warrior king like Harald Hardrada would have joined the melee with his forces, as they would gain morale and pride in seeing their king fight, and he would definitely not have remained outside of historical mention if he somehow managed to survive the Battle of Stamford Bridge. But let me know in the comments down below how you believed Harald Hardrada died, or if there are any other theories I may have missed out on. And remember, if you want to learn more about the death of some of history's greatest figures, then subscribe to my channel Historical Exit, and thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.